Wow, things are going gangbusters for Tesla right now, right? They're selling every car they can make. They keep raising the prices, and yet there's still a 7-month waiting list for Model 3s and Model Ys, and it seems like they can do no wrong. But did they make a mistake with Giga Berlin? Let's take a look. For those of you interested in investing, check out WeBull, an amazing platform for buying and selling stocks, and now cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and others. Open an account and get a free stock valued at up to $200, and fund your account and get another free stock valued at up to $1,600. Check out the link in the description and help the channel at the same time. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So I'm wearing my It's Speculation Time shirt again, and remember you can get this at the merch store. Plus you can get the AI in Training Student Driver bumper sticker, which has been very popular. It comes in both a magnet and a vinyl, like a unterrible bumper sticker. So either one you want to get, and you can put it on any car. My wife's putting it on the Mazda CX-5, and I've got one on the Tesla as well. So we've got two of them. It's just kind of fun. Anyway, you could sort of support the cause, I guess, if you want to. And if you are driving a Tesla, it actually helps a lot. Since I've had that sign on, people have been much kinder about the car and the goofiness that it sometimes does while I'm using the full self-driving beta. So definitely check that out if you're interested. It's been very popular since we released it. All right, so on to the topic at hand. What am I talking about here with Giga Berlin? Well, as many people know, there have been many sort of reviews of Tesla and the factory at this point seems to be basically ready to open, except that one review after another keeps coming up, and the latest one they just reinstated, I believe, ends November 22nd. So there's a comment period until November 22nd, and then the board is going to look at it all over again and make a thumbs up or thumbs down decision, or who knows, maybe they'll kick the can down the road again and have another comment section. They've had several of them already this fall. Clearly it's starting to annoy Elon Musk because he tweeted just one word, sigh, about it. Which, by the way, coming from Elon Musk is, I think, rather politic. So good for him for being politic about this. But anyway, there are several issues. I was actually going to do an entire episode about the water issues with Giga Berlin. And I'm going to sort of wrap that into this episode because I think that's the major issue. There are things like there's some protected bats that used to live in the forest, and there are some animals like lizards and things like that that live in the pine forest where they had to tear this stuff down to build the factory. But as far as I know, all of that is kind of water under the bridge, right? Speaking of water. But anyway, the big issue still right now is one of water. And actually Niels from Denmark really gave me a little bit of insight into Europe. And so I don't know any of the details about this. I only kind of know the general outline about this whole situation. But Niels was telling me that the United States has a very different attitude about water and water rights and pollution, or contamination of water as he called it, than they do in Europe. And it has to do with scale. And that is that the western part of the United States, sort of west of the Rockies more or less right now, is in a terrible multi-decade drought that's been going on. And it's really bad. And yet water rights are still not taken nearly as seriously here in the US as they are in countries in Europe in particular. And what Niels was telling me was that the US is just so big that we have lots and lots of space between our large population centers. And so watersheds, even if there are problems and even if there's drought, these watersheds still have a lot of room to sort of filter out contaminants and pollutants before they get into our drinking water. And then of course, when we have runoff, like when we use factories or we do nuclear power plants or whatever, and we have discard water that gets run off into bodies of water, there's also a lot of room for those bodies of water to sort of filter out before they reach other population centers. I'm not saying we're doing it right in the United States at all. I think we should probably be a lot more serious about our water rights, but it is something where we have a lot of room, which allows a lot of forgiveness for all of this. Nature kind of takes care of things for us. That, however, is not the situation in Europe. In Europe, as anybody who's traveled there knows, population centers are pretty dense. There's population or evidence of population, as Neil says, pretty much everywhere you look, right? So you can't go stand on a hill and look around and see nothing but nature. You're going to see some town or some roads or things like that. Of course, the United States, very different. There's, especially in the western half of the United States, there's gigantic tracts of land.
She's got huge tracts of land
where there's almost no evidence of civilization except maybe some cattle or something like that grazing. So very different. But what he was saying was that there's a very large concern in Europe in particular with contaminated water, which means that if you have a factory and you have factory runoff, where does that water go if it's not cleaned perfectly well? Well, it goes downstream, and there's another population center very, very close by. And so that contamination can lead to significant issues with people drinking contaminated water if it's not treated properly. So it's a big difference. Another factor that I didn't know but is really fascinating is that Berlin, the sort of northeastern German area where it's in, is a very dry area. You don't normally think about it that way, and it's certainly not a desert. But Niels also told me that Elon Musk made a little bit of a fool of himself when he was talking about Berlin and looking around and saying there's no desert here. What he says is, of course, it's not a desert per se, right? It's not like the Sahara where you've got sand dunes and things like that. But it's very seasonal. So in the dry season, there's hardly any rain. And so what you get is these bodies of water that are containing this water, of course, go down because they get used up over the dry season. And so even though it's not looking like a desert, it's got very minimal amounts of water at some parts of the year, which of course causes issues with, do you have enough water in the first place, right? Can you produce enough water to utilize for factories? Because factories use a ton of water. But then on the other hand, on the flip side of that, what happens when the water, the runoff from the factory goes out? If you're not careful, that of course will be highly contaminated, and it's more concentrated. If you have a river that's flowing at a very, very small rate and you're flowing contaminated water into it, it doesn't have a chance to filter out or dilute into a much larger body of water. So these are issues that he was telling me about, and it's very interesting, and I think it's really worth looking at, and it's something that perhaps Tesla should have examined a little bit more carefully before they started building the factory. But of course, at this point, they've got phase one of the factory pretty much done, and they've got a couple of more phases that they want to build out after this. And so that brings us to the title of this video. What happens? I don't know that the chances are really all that high because it sounds like it's a relatively small number of people who are doing the protesting, but you never know. Especially in Germany, a lot of times minorities have very, very powerful rights, especially if they're noisy about it. And certainly the German minority that's against the Giga factory Berlin has been very, very noisy about this. And so what happens if these people win their case and the government decides that Giga factory Berlin shouldn't even open ever? Well, first of all, we can sort of see these effects right now. Even though there's been no permanent decision, it's pretty obvious. People have said, engineers have told another of my Patreon patrons that they would be able to start producing things in about 2 hours. Now, that may be a little bit of a hyperbole, but let's just say a week. So, right, if they got final approval, they would be able to start producing cars, or at least big pieces of cars, within a week of that decision being made. What that means is that Tesla has purchased the land, they've built the factory, they've hired people to work, and they've got a huge supply chain with logistics of things, coming in, everything from raw materials to all the computer chips to batteries, et cetera, which are all piling up at this factory. And that means that this is costing them a fortune. Every single day that they're not operating is costing them a freaking fortune. Now, of course, as it turns out, they're such a profitable company that it doesn't really matter that much to them right now. But what if this becomes a permanent situation? What if the government says, nope, this is not possible. You guys are going to shut down and this factory is never going to come into existence, and, go pack up your bags and go home again. Now, first of all, I think this would actually be kind of tragic for the German, population at large, and honestly the government as well, because that's going to put a huge black eye on the government. No major industry is going to want to come into Germany after this, especially in the EV car industry. They're not going to want to come there when they've seen, the flagship company for EVs get shut down like that. So that would be a huge black eye. And Germany as a whole should be paying attention to the facts that VW and Daimler and BMW and Mercedes and on are all in big trouble right now. Even though it may not be super obvious at this point, they're all on the cusp of losing massive market share and having serious problems. VW, if they keep Herbert Diess, has a chance of making it through all of this. I'm not sure about the other companies. They're moving way, way, way too slowly. But anyway, I've done other videos on that. So that would be a really, really big negative for the German population, for the German citizenry, for their productivity standards, and quite frankly, their living standards, because the automotive industry is a major part part of what makes Germany an incredibly wealthy and productive country. So, okay, you might say, this is Germany's fault, and whatever happens to them, they metaphorically shot themselves in the foot. So that's their own issue and their own thing to deal with. But what about Tesla? You might immediately say, well, Tesla will sue the German government and they will win and they'll get a whole bunch of money. At least they will get a bunch of money as a sort of retribution or remuneration for having to shut the factory down. But not so fast. If you go back a couple of years, you remember that what Tesla did was they started building the factory with only temporary permits. They didn't ever get a lot of the permanent permits that they needed to get in order to construct the factory and have approval immediately or as a matter of course. And that's the reason why these hearings are actually going on right now. It's sort of Tesla's fault. Now, I totally agree with Tesla. If they'd waited for all of the German bureaucracy to actually roll all the way through, they'd probably still be waiting to break ground on this factory. So they're very, very slow, and I'm sure it frustrated Tesla a lot. But the fact of the matter is that they only had temporary permits to work on this factory. So I don't know that they have an awful lot of recourse if the German government decides to shut this down. They may well have to pack their bags and go home. And that would be, how many billions of dollars have they sunk into this factory? It would be a real tragedy for Tesla as well. Now, at this point, Tesla is profitable enough that it wouldn't, destroy them, but it would be a gigantic problem for them, because one of the big issues they have is they need that factory because, again, I was just talking about the fact that Tesla has orders out for 7 or 8 months at this point. They need to be able to produce more cars. I think they were expecting to be able to produce cars out of Germany at the very least before the end of the year. And I don't know what they're going to do with that. So they will be losing, I don't even know, let's say $4 or $5 billion probably by having to shut the factory down. And then they're not going to have the kind of production. They won't be able to ramp 100,000 or 200,000 cars next year as they start ramping up production at that factory. So those are huge factors, right? That's a couple of 100,000 lost sales that they have. And that will give other companies time to catch up. And it starts to make you think about maybe conspiracies with like Volkswagen or BMW or something, that they're trying to stop this. And they're what's that called? AstroTurfing. They're trying to create fake grassroots efforts to get people to say that things are wrong in order to slow all of this down so that they can catch up. I think that's a fool's errand. I don't think they're going to have a chance of catching up at all. But the issue is that they might slow Tesla down enough for especially China to catch up with them. And that's the big competition for everybody in the world right now. And I sure hope that everybody understands that. Chinese EV cars are looking really, really good right now. I've seen quite a few of their new cars, not even concepts or anything, but things are on the road in China right now. They look really good. I can't, of course, attest to the quality of it because I haven't been there and driven it. But everybody that I've talked to, including Sandy Monroe, who I'm going to be doing an interview with soon, which is really, really cool. So stay tuned for that. It'll be on his channel, but I'll alert you on Twitter or something if you're interested in finding out about that. But anyway, Sandy is very much on board with the fact that China has looked to Europe, and companies like BMW or Daimler Chrysler or whatever, they've looked to those companies to try to figure out how to do the manufacturing and how to make the fit and finish of these cars excellent. And what that means is that if it's anything like these cars look like, they look exciting, they have all of the software. If they're built to the quality level that we're used to from European car manufacturers, they're going to be cheaper than European cars, and they're going to be cheaper than Teslas. And so anything that they do to sort of hold Tesla up, all that's doing is just opening the floodgates to a Chinese tsunami is kind of what I've been thinking of it as. But anyway, I was saying it's going to make the Japanese tsunami look like a ripple. It's going to be a massive thing, and it's going to really, really sweep into the world if the rest of the world is not careful. And Tesla is kind of the flag bearer for the Western world versus China in this race. And if people slow Tesla down, it's going to cause big problems because it's going to be more market share for Chinese cars. China is going to take a huge, huge chunk of the market share of EV cars in the globe. It's just no question about it, because the labor costs are cheaper and they have all of the supply chain logistics, so they can crank these cars out fast once they get going. And they have a ton of these startups. So most of them are going to fail, but all you need is 3 or 4 big companies coming out of there. And in 10 10 years, those companies like BYD and others are going to be the Volkswagens and the Toyotas and the GMs of the world at that point. That's my prediction. And that Tesla's sort of, I liken this sort of to like Apple and Android in the phone space. You've got Tesla, which is more like the Apple thing. It's like very profitable. They take the sort of high-end segment of the market, but then I think the rest of the market is going to be dominated by Chinese car manufacturers. And so they're going to come in at a lower price, but it's going to be plenty good enough, and it's going to be $5,000 to $10,000 cheaper than Tesla's, and therefore people will purchase them to a large extent because of the cost, and they're going to be plenty good, right? An Android phone for a while, when the iPhone came out and the first Androids came out, they were not that good and they weren't that competitive, but now Android is just as good as Apple iPhones. I still use iPhones because I like the ecosystem that's around it, but people who are in the sort of Google Android ecosystem like that just as well. So again, good competition. Apple has a huge chunk of the profits of the phone market, but they don't have, I think they only have 12% of the market as a whole, and Android has most of the rest of that. So anyway, in about 10 years, that's what I see happening. I see it being Tesla and then Chinese companies is the most of it. And then everybody else is going to be niche players. Yeah, GM and Ford will probably still exist, but they'll be selling less than 1 million cars a year as sort of niche players. So anyway, my fear with Giga Berlin is that it's going to slow Tesla down. Tesla is a bit of a steamroller right now. They're just moving through and they're making great strides and they're way ahead of everybody, including the Chinese car manufacturers, including in the ways that they're building things. And they're just amazing at their manufacturing capabilities. But what could happen is if they get slowed down at Giga Berlin, that halves their new capability of building cars, right? So they've got Fremont, they've got Shanghai, they've got Berlin, and they've got Austin. Austin is going to come online because Texas is way behind them. So that, that's going to happen no matter what. But if you take Berlin and Austin, at least for a while, they're going to be manufacturing more or less the same number of cars. And so if you take away Berlin, you're getting rid of about a quarter of their capability of producing cars. It'll grow over time, right? So Berlin and Austin are both going to produce more cars than Fremont or Shanghai. So eventually it will be even bigger than that. But in the next year or two, you're taking away a quarter of Tesla's manufacturing capabilities. So in short, I don't think that the odds are super high that Germany is not going to allow Tesla to manufacture these cars in some form or other. My big fear is that they're going to delay it and it'll be another 4 months or another 6 months or something. It'll be mid-2022 before they start being able to produce cars, because they'll have to do something for environmental stuff to clean up or whatever it is, or build a new water plant or something to make sure that they have access to the amount of water they need and that they clean it when they get done. So that'll be more hundreds of millions of dollars they'll have to throw at it, and it's more time that it'll take. That's my, primary concern, but the German government could actually shut it down and say, nope, you're never going to be able to build a car here ever. And that would be pretty tragic. It would be tragic for Germany. It would be really bad for Tesla because it's going to take away a big chunk of their eventual manufacturing capability. It's also, again, for Tesla going to give them a bit of a black eye because they've been a steamroller. They've been moving forward with incredible momentum in the past few years, and that will derail them to some extent. So that would be a concern for me too. But the biggest concern is that all of this stuff is going to allow China to catch up, and they're catching up real fast. All they need is another 4 or 5 years to get things ramped up, and they are going to be a massive threat to the global auto industry and the rest of the world. So watch and see. I mean, you can come back and you can watch this video in 2025 or 2026, and you can see whether Chinese EVs are being sold in the United States and Europe at that point. I pretty much guarantee you that there will be one sold there. It won't be a ton of them yet, but by 2030, there's going to be a lot of Chinese EV cars sold in the United States and Europe. So in brief, Germany, do the right thing. Help Tesla to make this factory happen as quickly as possible. I know that's antithetical to your governmental strategy, but you really need to press forward on this because it's very important. And remember, these are all going to be German employees. Yes, Tesla's a US company, but these things are going to be manufactured in Germany. They're going to be German employees. They're going to be German executives that are working in this company. They're going to be selling it to Europe. It's going to look really good for you, and you're going to need it because the legacy car manufacturers are going to be losing market share rapidly in the next 5 or 6 years. Alrighty, I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking and maybe a little bit disheartening. Hopefully not too disheartening. Hopefully it's a call to arms for people to go like, yes, let Tesla get ahead of all this stuff. But anyway, if you did enjoy it, definitely like the episode so other people can find it. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Patreon. Thank you all so much, particularly Niels and Claudia. You two helped to, construct this episode in my brain and help me think through several issues that were really, really important. So thank you very much for that. And of course, if you want to join the club, just check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in some awesome merch, check out the link in the description. We've got the Tesla Bot t-shirt, which is super popular these days. Don't mess with Tesla. Lots of other t-shirts, tumblers, mugs, etc. So check out the link in the description and help the channel out. And for those of you interested in investing, check out WeBull, an amazing platform for buying and selling stocks, and now cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and others. Open an account and get a free stock valued at up to $200, and fund your account and get another free stock valued at up to $1,600. Check out the link in the description and help the channel at the same time. Thank you. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how clicking on a link and going shopping for a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. And as always, feel free to ask me questions in the comments or at my email address, which is drknowitallknows@gmail.com. Till next time, bye-bye.